Let's go with Zechariah chapter 13. And in that day, remember that originally the scripture had no chapters and verses. It was all written down one after the other. So it is all unit. It all goes together. So that's why it just continues in that day. And he has said many days, many times in that day, previous chapter, referring the end times, the end times, the end times. And we saw in the previous chapter how it referred to the last war of this reality, this human history, which will end up in Armageddon. So in that day, a fountain shall be open for the house of David. That fountain, obviously, is the Ruach HaKodesh that comes through Yahushua, the water of life. In that day, a fountain shall be opened for the house of David and for the inhabitants of Jerusalem, for sin and for uncleanness. And it shall be in that day, well, obviously, meaning that that fountain will cleanse us, right? Through the transformation, will be cleansed. And by being with Mashiach, and not only us, but the many and the nations, there will be continual cleansing through Mashiach, who will be present. And it shall be in that day, declares Yahweh of hosts, that I cut off the names of the idols from the earth. How powerful. So you see how it first mentions sin and uncleanness, and then it goes on to speak about the false names. This is a verse that I really love because it's very powerful. And when Yahweh told me about the names, this verse became key when it comes to understanding a very important point, and also when it comes to debating. Because with this verse, nobody can say anything regarding the name that they worship, obviously, if it's not the true one, meaning Jesus, Yeshua, Isa, Yahshua, Yehoshua, etc., etc. And I say that, well, it's a lot I want to say in this verse. So first, I repeat, in that day, a fountain, the Ruach HaKodesh that comes through Yahushua, the water of life, shall be open, for he is the one who opened. The last is the one who closes. For the house of David, that's why root and branch, opening, closing. And for the inhabitants of Jerusalem, those who instruct peace, those who follow the peace that surpasses all understanding. For sin and for sin and for uncleanness. So what the first came to take away and what the last comes to also take away or pay for. Two things to represent both manifestations with two different missions. And in Hebrew, it says lechatat, which is for sin. That's what Mashiach came to take away. Ul nida, uncleanness, impurity. Which kind of makes reference to how Yahushua already came and took away. Remember how Mashiach explained when he washed the feet of the disciples, that they didn't need to be washed all over, only their feet, right? Because remember that Peter wanted to be bathed in like entirely, and Mashiach explained to him, no, only your feet. I don't want to see you, Peter. uh, put your clothes back on, Peter. Imagine that moment. So um that was a teaching regarding how Mashiach came to cleanse us entirely, but through our time in the world, our preaching, taking the teaching to everybody, represented by our feet. Whatever we are told, whatever we encounter, whatever we may go through, whatever we may feel that may not be correct, meaning, let's say we have a bad emotion against or because of what somebody may say to us, because of what we believe or because of what we just taught, or let's say we teach something and that person comes out with an argument that we had not heard and it shakes our foundation, then we need to go and get into the scriptures and clean our feet again. Meaning we need to get rid of all the dust of falsehood that may have gotten stuck to our sandals, which is the zeal for teaching the good news, right? So that dirt that we get from preaching the good news is what we need to wash away. But we have been cleansed completely. It's only our feet that get dirty because of preaching the good news, which is what represented that moment with Mashiach washing their feet, other than his humility, of course. I mentioned all of that because it is like here for sin and for uncleanness. It will be like for the sin that was before Mashiach that he took away when he cleansed us completely, and then for the uncleanness that would come during the apostasy, that of the feet. And that's why the two witnesses come as the 2 feet to defeat the New World Order, which are the feet of the statue that we see in Daniel 2. All right. So for sin and for uncleanness. And it shall be in that day when that fountain is open already for both things, meaning for the first and the last already manifested. In that day, declares Yahweh of hosts, that I cut off, just like it says in Daniel, that Mashiach Nagid would appear and Mashiach would be cut off. So the world, decided to cut Mashiach off the world. But now Yahweh says that I cut off the names of the idols from the earth. And I repeat, this is so powerful because it shows first the importance of the names that we invoke. Second, it shows that Yahweh will get rid of all the false names. So if he's going to do it eventually, why not do it now in order to please him? Because if we don't, then we may be cut off with those names. And third, which I believe is the most important when it comes to what I was saying regarding debating, or not that I like to debate, but I mean is when you talk to somebody that does not understand and you're trying to tell them how important it is. For instance, when it comes to the name Jesus, a lot of people love that name. A lot of people would die for that name. And that is not the name of the Messiah. And that is even like, it's very clear. It should be clear for everybody. If you really think about it for a little bit, people should realize, no, yeah, that name is not Hebrew. That name could not exist 2,000 years ago because that name is Latin, pretty much, right? Jesus. That's why you see a bunch of Latin people called Jesus, but hardly you will see somebody called Jesus, right? And that has to do with idolatry in the Latin community, sadly, but also has to do with the fact that the name itself is Latin. So, and I'm going around and around because this is very important. And this verse is not only saying that he will cut off the names of the false Elohim, it's saying he will cut off the names of the idols, right? So if what did I do? If one, what am I? Just a second. All right. So let's say I write idol. Let me go to images in Google. Well, not this. Religions. As we know, there are a lot. Obviously, the main ones that are going to appear are these from Hinduism, where there are way too many to count. But you see how then some of the Catholic ones start to appear. However, obviously, they don't call them idols. So they don't call them idols. That's an issue. meaning they don't appear here, and it's an issue because they believe that they are not idol. There are a lot of people who are Catholics who believe they are not committing idolatry. You see here, idol worshiper, and you see all these idols. So this is obviously an idol, isn't a statue, and people would worship it, people would bow down, people would kiss it. This is a statue, this is a statue, this is a statue. They are all idols. And not only statues are idols, obviously, but I just trying to make a point here. So all these are idols, right? Should be obvious. And when you look at this idol, you show this idol to anybody, you show this one or any other. And let me see, because I saw one that so you see this idol, you ask anybody who is this in the middle, they will say that's Mary, right? You say who's this on the left, they will say that's Jesus, right? Almost everybody in the world would say that's Mary, that's Jesus. Those are the names of these two, right? That's simple. Anybody will say that's Jesus, that's Mary. So those two idols have names, proper names. Well, not that proper, but I mean their own names, Mary and Jesus. So when we read the verse again, I cut off the names of the idols, not just the names that are false or the names of false Elohim, but the names of the idols from the earth. So that means that any idol that has a name will be cut off. Any name that is connected to any idol will be cut off. So if any name that is connected to any idol will be cut off, then the name Jesus and the name Mary will be cut off for sure, because they are names of idols. Because the mother of Mashiach was called Miriam, and I have never seen an image or idol of Miriam. And the name of Mashiach is Yahushua, and I have never seen or will I see an idol of Yahushua, right? Even the false Messiah, when he appears, he won't use the name Yahushua, he will use the name Jesus, because Yahushua himself prophesied about that when he said in John 5:43, I come in the name of my Father, Yahushua, but when other comes in his own name, him you will receive, Jesus. So this is a huge verse in importance. I cut off the names of the idols. So that means Jesus, God, Mary, Krishna, Buddha, and all of them. I cut off the names of the idols from the earth. And you see all these verses here. They are all very important and all have to do with the same. And since they are important, let me just go Zephaniah 3:9. For then I shall turn unto the peoples a clean lip, meaning clean language, clean a clean language. So just like in the Tower of Babel, Yahweh confused the languages in 70. Now he will turn it back and give one language to all the peoples, so that they all, not a few, not just the Yahudim, not just, as they would say, the Jewish people, they all call on the name of Yahweh. And remember that the Jewish people don't call on the name. They prohibit using the name. So that they all call on the name of Yahweh. So it is a commandment from Yahweh to call on his name. So why do they claim it is the opposite? So that they'll call on the name of Yahweh to serve him with one shoulder. So to serve him with one shoulder in one accord means, or it starts with calling him with his name. We should all use one name if we're going to refer to the same one, for Yahweh is one and his name one. So They all call on the name of Yahweh to serve him with one shoulder. Then we also have Hosea 2:17, another powerful verse. 2:17. And I shall remove the names of the Baalim from her mouth, meaning I shall remove the names of the lords from her mouth, because the congregation, the church, keeps invoking the Lord, keeps calling on Baal. And they shall no more be remembered by their name. They will no longer remember the false names which they worship nowadays. And just Exodus 23:13. And in all that I have said to you, take heed and make no mention of the name of other mighty ones. Let it not be heard from your mouth. And remember that every word that we say is written down and used in judgment. Let it not be heard from your mouth. And it shall be in that day, declares Yahweh of hosts, that I cut off the names of the idols from the earth, and they shall be remembered no more. And I shall also remove the prophets and the unclean spirit from the earth. Wonderful. Scripture says that prophecy will end because knowledge itself will end. We will know everything once we receive the new body, once we enter the next reality. Other than that, prophets, remember that the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Mashiach. Once we enter the new reality, Mashiach will already rule and will be known as the Son of the Most High by all, and therefore there won't be any need for prophecy to give testimony of Mashiach, because he will be clear. Testimony is given when something is hidden, right? When something is hidden is when you need a witness who saw when nobody else saw. But in the next reality, everything will be out in the open. Everything will be clear. Everything will be revealed. So there will be no need for prophecy, because prophecy is testimony. Is that clear? I hope it is. And that is what has led to false prophets. Because since they are talking about something that is hidden, there are people who believe that they can see what is hidden. So they follow them. And they cannot check by themselves because they are not prophets, and they end up being fooled by one who claims to be a prophet. So that's why after mentioning prophets, he mentioned the spirit, the unclean spirit, meaning the spirit of error, the spirit that has deceived the false prophets and then those who follow them. The spirit of error, who will then manifest as the false Messiah, because Yahushua gives the spirit of truth. The false Messiah, the spirit of error, the unclean spirit. And it shall be, when one prophesies again, then his father and mother who brought him forth shall say to him, you shall not live, because you have spoken falsehood in the name of Yahweh. And his father and mother who brought him forth shall pierce him through when he prophesies. This is interesting, because remember that we just read how Yahweh said a few verses before this one, and they will look upon me whom they pierced, right? Yahweh came as Mashiach to his people, and his people rejected him, as we see in John 1, right? He came for his people, but his people rejected him and killed him, pierced him. So now we have here that it says, and it shall be when one prophesies again, just like Mashiach came and he prophesied, and the last comes as the prophet, then his father and mother, in the case of both first and last, this reality, meaning, well, Yahushua came to his people rejected him as his father and mother, right? Being the mother, Israel, the nation, the land. His father, in a sense, the leaders, those who rule. Both the leaders and the people in general rejected Mashiach. Then his father and mother who brought him forth shall say to him, you shall not live, because you have spoken falsehood in the name of Yahweh. And his father and mother who brought him forth shall pierce him through when he prophesies. They kill Mashiach, his people. The same will happen with the last. But it's also referring to that same point from the previous verse of how in the end people will reject prophecy because of so much falsehood. They won't believe any, even if it's true. And then if we even take it further to the next reality, everything will be revealed. So if anybody appears saying that he's revealing something that no one knows, that will be falsehood. And it shall be in that day that the prophets shall be ashamed. This goes with what I was just explaining. Nowadays, if somebody's a prophet, he becomes ashamed or worried by what he receives, because we know how the world is, how people act, what they believe, what has happened in Christianity, the great amount of false prophets there are. And it shall be in that day that the prophets shall be ashamed. Look that it says the prophets, so it means true prophets, not false ones, shall be ashamed. Everyone of his vision when he prophesies, and not put a hairy robe in order to deceive. In order to deceive. This is so amazing for several reasons. First, remember that Eliyahu, Yahuhanan, who, like I mentioned in the previous chapter, represents Hillel. That's why his head had to be cut off before Mashiach died. And like Mashiach explained in one of the books that was taken out of the scriptures, in the book of Thomas, he said, with the head of Yahuhanan the Immerser, the head of prophecy was cut off. And somebody asked, how can you cut off the head of prophecy? And Yahushua said, when you come to understand what the head means, then you will understand what cutting the head of prophecy means. And that means that when John the Baptist had his head cut off, represented that the authority of Lucifer over the world was being cut off. He had the authority to pass down to the earth the revelation that Yahweh was sending to humans. So he needed to be cut off. And that is the type of prophecy being represented or mentioned here. And it shall be in that day that the prophets shall be ashamed, every one of his vision when he prophesies, and not put a hairy robe in order to deceive. Because Hillel became deception. He began to deceive the people through his interpretations of the prophecies he was sent to reveal. So the prophecy was right because the scriptures are inspired, but his interpretation given to the people became the Talmud, which is the wrong interpretation. The letter kills, but the spirit gives life. Remember also, it's interesting that the hairy robe, hairy, was a term used as a title to refer to demons. So how interesting that prophets would dressed in hairy robes in order to prophesy. Now, one of the reasons, or spiritually, the reasons why hairy robes would be used for that is because hair is supposed to act like an antenna. So, for instance, yeah, like long hair in a woman represents her connection to the ruach being stronger to that of men. And in our case, I guess we have the beard, right? And that is why is on the bottom of the face where the mouth speaks. And since the man is head, leader, and teacher, then it is the ruach that needs to speak through the mouth, while the woman is covered with it, protected like the congregation, amongst other things. So the hairy robe connected to being well, connected to a spirit, receiving that frequency that comes from the spirit and being able to transmit it as a prophet. So Eliyahu would dress in a robe of camel hair. Same John the Baptist. Then his head is cut off to represent that the time of Hillel as the administrator in the heavens over the earth was being cut off because Mashiach had come. And after that, the prophecy only comes to the Ruach HaKodesh, through the Ruach of Yahweh, which comes in the name of Mashiach, right? And that is testimony of Mashiach, what I was explaining a moment ago. So it shall be in that day that the prophets shall be ashamed, every one of his vision when he prophesies, and not put a hairy robe in order to deceive. Order to deceive, I repeat, because Hillel used prophecy to deceive people. And we see that happening a lot in scriptures. Even true prophets, we see in scriptures that Yahweh would send spirits, and those spirits would deceive the prophets when the people that were listening to the prophets needed to be punished. So that is something like, and if you want me to go and share one example, I'll go and do it. But for instance, there is one when two kings were going to go to war. One wasn't so sure about it. The other one really wanted to go. So the one that wasn't sure told the other one, why don't you bring the prophets and let them speak? And he brought a bunch of prophets, but the one who asked for the prophets knew that they were all false. I mean, they were all saying what the king wanted to hear. So he told him, do you have a true prophet around? So he said, well, I know a prophet, but he always tells me negative things and I don't like him. So he said, well, that may be a true prophet, so why don't you bring him? So then in the heavens, Yahweh asked the spirits, which spirit wants to go and tell the king something that I need the king to do, even though it's not what is going to bring salvation for him or whatever. So a spirit came about and said, I will be able to lead him astray. And he sent him, he allowed the spirit to go, and that spirit entered in all the prophets, and those prophets started to say that he was going to win the war. But I repeat, they were prophets because they did hear that spirit, but that spirit was a spirit of error, falsehood, mentioned here. So that shows how Hillel, in charge of the angels and the spirits, would prophesy, but through the prophecy would also deceive. And that is why also nowadays, a true prophet would not claim to be a prophet. True prophet would not claim to be a prophet like Eliyahu would do. And he wouldn't do it not because it is not right, but because of, well, for one, humility, but also because of all the false prophets. So calling yourself a prophet kind of makes you sound like a false prophet, right? It's kind of what it is nowadays. So now a true prophet would not want to look like a prophet looked back in the day, because he would be clear what he's trying to do. Like I have mentioned, there are people who are getting dressed in sackcloth and going around and preaching because they want to fulfill Revelation 11. But Revelation 11 will not be fulfilled in that way, and it won't be fulfilled just by the fact of somebody acting out what is written. Yahweh will fulfill it the way he planned it, and most people won't see it happening in front of their faces until it has happened already. Like Yahweh said, I will cover your face and you won't be able to see me, but once I have passed, you will be able to see my back. So, and it shall be in that day that the prophets shall be ashamed, and every one of his vision when he prophesies, and not put a hairy robe in order to deceive, but shall say, I am no prophet, I am a farmer, for a man sold me as a slave in my youth. You see this? This is amazing. And I repeat the whole thing, even the previous chapter, because of the way it is prophesied, refers to the first and the last. As I always say, what one fulfills in the spiritual sense, the other one in the literal sense, etc., etc. We already saw how they would mourn for him as an only son, and they will mourn for him as the firstborn. Now look at this. But shall say, I am no prophet, I am a farmer. Yahushua said, one is the one who sows the seed, and one the one who harvests, first and last. But both are farmers, right? The one who puts the seed or the one who goes and takes the harvest, they can all claim to be farmers. So Yahweh is the farmer, first and last, who puts the seed and harvests the fruit. For a man sold me as a slave. How much is the price of a slave according to scriptures? 30 pieces of silver. In my youth, meaning as a child, as a son, when Yahushua came as the son, he was sold by Yehuda. How can I avoid this from happening? Click. So I'm no prophet, I am a farmer. Which, interestingly enough, and confirms also all the things that we've been saying, is that it says, I am no prophet, I am a farmer. The prophet would be the term used in the literal sense. Farmer, as a parable, can be taken as a metaphor of being a prophet. Because when you give a word from Yahweh, you're planting a seed and you're hoping the person will give fruit, right? So it is like the prophet saying he's a prophet without saying it directly, like using parables like Mashiach did. So for a man, Yehuda, Judas, sold me as a slave in my youth, as in my first manifestation, I was sold like as a slave, 30 pieces of silver. And remember that the 30 pieces of silver appeared in this same book, Zechariah, right? We saw that in previous studies. And one shall say to him, what are these wounds in your hands? Amazing. So a few chapters ago, we saw that Yahweh asked how much they would pay for him. And they paid 30 pieces of silver. And Yahweh said, okay, put that in the treasure of the temple. Now, previous chapter, we saw that he mentioned that they will see him. Well, he said, they will see me whom they pierced. Right? So 30 pieces of silver. They will see him whom they pierced. And now he says, what are these wounds in your hands? And he shall say, because I was struck at my home by those who love me. What? So he came to his people and his people rejected him, pierced his hands on the cross after they paid 30 pieces of silver for him, the price of a slave. So in the second manifestation, he won't claim to be a prophet. He just comes to harvest. Is that understood? So powerful, powerful verse. The whole book is amazing. And one shall say to him, what are these wounds in your hands? So he is a prophet, but he's claiming he's not. Or he's a prophet, but he just wants to be a farmer, which connects also with Elishua, remember? Known as Elisha, Eliyahu, then came Elishua. And with those two names, we can make the name Yahushua, right? Remember that we have the prophet Eliyahu, and then after him came Elishua. If we take this from Eliyahu and put it here, we get El Eli Yahushua, the mighty one. My mighty one is Yahushua. right? So the name Yahushua comes from the two names. Well, it doesn't come from there, but you can see it in the two names, Eliyahu, Elishua. Because Eliyahu, when we take away the fact that Eliyahu had to come to prepare the way and then comes as the other witness, Eliyahu and Elishua represent the first and the last. Eliyahu, Yahushua, is the image of Yahweh. So my mighty one is Yahweh, Eliyahu. So Yahushua came to show that Yahweh is the mighty one. Elishua represents Yahweh coming again, but to bring salvation finally, after he made it available 2,000 years ago. Now the last comes to manifest it through his mission. So Eliyahu, Elishua, and after the first and last, they will become one. Yahushua, El Eli, or Eli El. My mighty one is the mighty one, right? Hope this understood. So Eliyahu came and represents the first manifestation. Then comes the Elishua, who represents the last, and he received the double portion as the firstborn, like we just saw. Only son, firstborn. So Eliyahu made 7 miracles. Elishua made 14 miracles. The last one was to give resurrection to a person after he had died, right? 14 miracles, numerical value of David, right? As the branch of David. Now, if we add the 14 miracles with the 7 miracles of Eliyahu, we get 21, which is the numerical value of Eyeh, I will be, which is translated as I am. Like I said, he made 14 miracles, the last one after he died, which represents that after the last dies, then the transformation and resurrection will happen for the few and the many. But another thing, remember that Elishua was called to become a prophet when he was working the land, right? He had oxen and he was working, and he was called by Eliyahu. So Elishua, who represents the last, was a farmer, yet he was a prophet. Is that understood? So we see here that he's a prophet, but he's claiming not to be. He's just a farmer. So I am a farmer, for a man sold me as a slave in my youth. And one shall say to him, what are these wounds in your hands? And he shall say, because I was struck, meaning in the past tense, meaning in the previous manifestation. Even though by the time this was written, it was still in the future. So this shows that this prophecy is for our time when Mashiach already came and died and resurrected. I was struck at home in Israel with his family by those who love me. How amazing. By those who claim to love Mashiach. They were the ones who struck Mashiach, who killed Mashiach. Vayomer, live ma hamakot. What are these wounds? Haile bein yadecha. Bein yadecha, in the middle of your hands. What are these wounds in the middle or between your hands? And he will say, I was hurt, struck in the house of those who love me. Now, this word, those who love me, the ones who killed him. And I know I've said it many times, but remember John 1:11. He came to his own, and his own did not receive him. But as many as received him, to them he gave the authority to become children of Yahweh, to those believing in his name. Now, the word that appeared there as those who love me, numerical value 58, which is the same numerical value as favor, chen. Chen. I didn't delete the first ones. Yes. Chen, 58, favor, because through his death we receive the favor, forgiveness of sins. And the last comes as in the days of Noah, which is also the numerical value 58. Okay, and one shall say to him, what are these wounds in your hands? And he shall say, because I was struck at home by those who love me. So amazing prophecy that Mashiach would come and would be killed by those who claim to love his coming. O sword, awake against my shepherd. Look at that right afterward, right? Remember what it is written in John 10. I am the door and the good shepherd, first and last. So right after mentioning the coming of the prophet who will not claim to be a prophet, but only a farmer, he who had been struck during the first manifestation by his beloved ones, now it says, O sword, awake against my shepherd. The good shepherd is the second manifestation. Remember that the sword, a great sword, is given to the rider of the second horse, the second seal of Revelation 6, which most likely will be the beast, the world leader, the little horn of the book of Daniel, who will, according to the book of Daniel, kill the shepherd, the witness like Moshe. O sword, awake against my shepherd, against the man who is my companion, declares Yahweh of hosts. Strike the shepherd and let the sheep be scattered. But I shall turn my hand upon the little ones. Beautiful and powerful verse. O sword, awake against my shepherd, meaning they would kill Mashiach, they will kill the last. Against the man who is my companion. This is interesting because we could see this in a couple ways. Either Yahweh talking about Mashiach, who is his companion at the right hand, or the last and his companion Eliyahu, right? So we can see this as Yahweh talking about how they would kill Mashiach, who now is at his right hand, so therefore is his companion. But also could represent how Yahweh would come as the last, who is the good shepherd, but he won't be alone. He will have a companion, which is Eliyahu, and they will kill them both. Is that understood? O sword, awake against my shepherd, against the man who is my companion. Also interesting that it says my shepherd, because there are times when Yahweh calls the last his Mashiach. Not only Mashiach, but his Mashiach. So in this case, is his shepherd. Verse 7, sword awake over my shepherd. Roi. Ve'al gever amiti. And against the man who is with me, declares Yahweh Tsabaoth. And then it prophesies what happened when they captured Mashiach. When they captured Yahushua, this verse was fulfilled according to the good news. And it will also happen with the last. When they captured the last, the 144,000 will flee to the mountains. So, O sword, awake against my shepherd, against the man who is my companion, declares Yahweh of hosts. Strike the shepherd and let the sheep be scattered. But I shall turn my hand, as in the last, upon the little ones, meaning the chosen few. He will protect the chosen few when they kill the last, who is the shepherd. And it shall be throughout all the soil, declares Yahweh, that 2/3 therein are cut off and die, and 1/3 is left therein. That 2/3 therein are cut off and die, and 1/3 is left therein. This kind of shows the fact that most people will die. We can see it as the many who will die and the few who will be saved. Also, we can see it as the nations or the unbelievers, the wicked ones who will have to go through destruction, and then those who will be resurrected. Therefore, he would count the many. That 2/3 are cut off and die. Remember that during the fourth seal, a fourth of humanity will die or will have died by that moment. And then during the sixth seal, a third of what's left. So right now there are about 8 billion. So by the time of the fourth seal, there would be 6 billion. And then after the sixth seal, there will be 4. Because it would be a third of that, of those 6. So that would be 2 billion. So 4 billion. And then, so by that time, half of humanity had been, would be dead. And then we have 4 billion for the last plagues. So in that time, basically the rest of the wicked will die, while the few are protected and the many resurrected. But if we take this in account in the most literal sense, then that would mean that, just a second. Yeah, that by the time of the plagues, more than half of what's left will be destroyed. More than half of what's left, which would be around 4 billion people. So more than 2 billion. Because at the end, only a third is left therein. It says, and it shall be throughout all the soil, declares Yahweh. So all the earth, that 2/3 therein are cut off and die. 2/3, and 1/3 is left therein. Oh yeah, so like 2.7 billion, around that. And I shall bring the third into fire. So with this, actually helps to explain. And I shall bring the third into fire. What third? The one that was left. And I shall bring the third into fire and refine them as silver is refined, and try them as gold is tried. Because Yahweh said that the coming of the Son of Man would be like the days of Noah. In the time of Noah, Yahweh cleansed the earth with water, but now he will do it with fire. In the literal sense, yet the last comes as the spiritual fire, who will immerse the few in fire for them to be tested like the gold, and they will pass the test, so they will be protected from the trial that is coming. Yet the many, who are like a third, because in fact, Christianity is pretty much a third of humanity. So how interesting that a third of humanity, so are, well, Christians, Catholics, all of that, right? All denominations. Most of humanity separated in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Obviously, there are a bunch of other religions and a bunch of false Elohim. But almost a third of humanity is Christian. Let me see how Google says. You see, 2.38 billion, according to them, of course, right? 2.38 billion. And I mentioned how pretty much 2.7 would be a third. Of course, just a little bit less, 2.6, 2.67. But anyways, so you see how close to a third of the population of the world is Christianity. I'm not saying that everybody else will go to hell and only Christians will enter, because remember that there are many who claim to be Christians who won't enter, while there are others who don't claim to be Christians nowadays, yet they will accept the true doctrine eventually during the testimony of the two witnesses. But my point is that the numbers fit the prophecy. I'll read it again. And it shall be throughout all the soil, all the earth, declares Yahweh, that 2/3 therein are cut off and die. 2/3 will be lost because they have followed falsehood, Lucifer and Samael, etc., etc. And 1/3 is left therein, as in the many. And I shall bring the third into fire through death, the great tribulation. For the few will go through fire, but spiritually speaking, and refine them as silver, for the many are represented as silver. And refine them as silver is refined, and try them as gold is tried. by going through death, they will be tried as gold, and they will pass once they accept death instead of the mark of the beast. They shall call on my name, meaning that they didn't call on his name before, like the many. But once they are resurrected, they will call on his name, because Yahweh will give a clean language to all, as we saw in Zechariah. They shall call on my name, and I shall answer them, the many. And I shall answer them. I shall say, this is my people, while they say, Yahweh is my Elohim. So the many who will have to go through death, through the fire, through the great tribulation, will be resurrected in order to call on his name, and then they will say that Yahweh is is their Elohim, and he will call them his people. Remember, the many will be his people, the few will be also his people, but as kings and priests. I hope that's understood.